Welcome to Discourse Politics, everybody, and today we are going to answer the question, are polls accurate? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a trip down memory lane and see what 2016 felt like. Then we're going to go over the polling errors that was defined by the American Association for Public Opinion Research, get into that real quick, find out what the average error in state polls was, what they think the reasons were, and what their proposed solutions are. Then we're going to check and see if that resolved the problem. Then we're going to look at some 2020 polling to see how effective their solutions were. Then we're going to answer the question, are polls accurate in 2020? So let's get into this. Here is what media coverage of the election in 2016 looked like on October 26th, 2016. Now, that election was held on the 8th, so we have to actually back out 5 days. It would be the equivalent of what news would look like on October 21st, just to scale it. So imagine this is how the news is sounding on October 21st of 2020.
Well, with just 12 days now until the end, such as it is, of the showdown, Clinton v. Trump, the country can certainly expect a barrage of polling to come with general assessments of the race. An ABC News Washington Post survey just out today, in fact, shows this: Hillary Clinton beating Donald Trump by some 6 points, 48 to 42%.
Polls disagree, I always say, because pollsters disagree. And what that means is every pollster has a little bit of a different take on who's actually going to show up, who is actually a likely voter, and what the electorate looks like in terms of how old it is, how young it is, how many Democrats, how many Republicans.
And that is important because we're going to look at later on is how these methodologies produced such a wrong number, especially in state polling.
One thing it all does sort of boil down to, though, Josh, is nobody's really disputing right now Hillary Clinton has a lead in the polls. The argument is mostly around the size of that lead at this point.
Oh, how he's so wrong in state polling. But nonetheless, let's take a look at some of their electoral math and how they broke down the states. It's very similar to what I said in my last video, which is that once Donald Trump wins the big three, if he wins the big three, which is Florida, North Carolina, Ohio, what does he do from there? And it's extremely difficult to see how he moves forward. But let's see what they say.
Let's suppose that goes to him. If I give that to Trump here on the map, and we're going to make sure that thing goes. All right. So he's still got a ways to go. So if you look at where the map stands now, you've still got to see him flip back Ohio. He's got to get North Carolina, where, quite frankly, he is trailing. And if he doesn't get that, let's suppose Clinton wins North Carolina, she's going to get a pretty big boost. She's going to be well over 270.
So it was really hard for people to see how Donald Trump got to 270 in 2016. But then the early voting started to come in, so they started to analyze the tea leaves of what early voting looked like and how detrimental that was to Donald Trump.
But then you look at North Carolina, and the Democrats, registered Democrats, have an edge there. More registered Democrats have turned out so far to vote than Republicans. So that could bode well for the Clinton campaign.
Are more people voting early this time than ever before? Are you seeing that?
So I can remember some of my Democratic friends actually being excited about North Carolina based upon those early voting returns. It's 48 to 28. So even if all the unaffiliated voters went to Donald Trump, that's the only way he could win that state. So they were looking at these early returns and pretty much popping corks before it was even over. Then they started to touch on something that pollsters may have missed, and it was immediately dismissed.
The Trump campaign has made the case that this election could attract voters who have never voted or who have not voted in a long time. Any evidence of that?
Not really. In fact, when you look at the vote history of the people who've turned in their ballots early or voted early, you see that most of them have voted before. In fact, particularly among Republicans, 8, 9, and 10 of them have voted in the past.
So there's already a flaw in his logic here. Obviously, if somebody's a first-time voter, it's highly doubtful they're going to be an early voter, and it's highly doubtful they're going to be at the front of the line. This is their first time voting. They don't know the rules. They're probably going to show up on Election Day because that's what they think they're supposed to do. 4 seconds of logic could have stopped him from saying something that probably couldn't be proven one way or the other based upon early voting.
Polls often disagree because pollsters disagree. And what that means is that they have different views of who's going to turn out and what the electorate is going to look like. And I think there's a lot of disagreement about that.
So two things I want to point out. One, the image that they have on the screen is Donald Trump is behind 9 points in two polls, and he's behind 3 points in another poll. Right now, it looks more like Joe Biden's ahead by 11 points and as low as 5 points in some polls. The second thing I want to talk about is he mentions turnout and who is going to turn out. I don't want to spoil this, but we will get into it doesn't matter how the pollsters set up their methodology. It was never going to be right to begin with. So I don't want to spoil it, but it didn't matter what their methodology was. It was going to be flawed from the get-go. So then the election happens, and Donald Trump obviously was not behind. The polling was flawed, and Pew Research put out this video.
So, if you're one of those people like me who are watching the polls closely in the run-up to the election, you might have woken up that next day and thought, I don't think they did a very good job on this one.
That is correct. That's very astute. Now let's see why they think they got it wrong along with all other pollsters.
We have three hypotheses as to why this probably happened. The first is who was in the polls. So this is an idea called non-response bias, which basically says the people who take your survey are different than the people who won't take your survey. And we know from research that we've done in the past that people who have lower education, lower income, people who are less civically engaged, less likely to vote, less likely to contact an elected official, those people are all less likely to take your survey. So if those people aren't in your survey and those people either vote or vote even more than one would expect, like have higher turnout than expected, that can be a problem for your polls.
She's really close, but she's missing one important aspect, which we'll get into later.
The shy Trumper hypothesis, which basically says that voting for Trump is considered socially undesirable by some people. They don't want to admit it either to an interviewer on the phone or to pollsters in general. And then when they get into the voting booth, who they actually vote for is not the same person that they told pollsters they were going to vote for.
There's a third possibility, and this one is a little polling geeky. Sorry in advance. When you take a survey, because of social desirability bias, you end up getting more people telling you that they plan to vote than actually are going to turn out. So in a national election, you might get 50 or 55% of the public turning out, but you might get 70 or 80% of the people on the phone telling you they're going to vote because maybe that day they do plan to vote. And also, voting is the right thing to do in a democracy, so they want to tell you that. So pollsters have to do something called modeling a likely electorate.
And this is extremely important, so make sure you pay attention to this part.
They put what's called a likely voter screen on there, and they say, based on what I know about you, based on what you've told me or answered in any fashion, I'm going to say, do you look like a likely voter? Do you look like someone who's voted in the past and follows politics and is enthusiastic? They'll tick through a number of things, and then they'll say, yes, okay, you, I'm putting in the sample to project the election, and you, I don't think you're really going to vote.
So again, she's really close. Number two, we'll talk about the shy Trumper as well, but number one and number three are close, but they're missing a very important aspect. So let's quit playing around and let's get to the study.
So to try to understand what's happened here, APOR has convened an ad hoc task force on the 2016 election polling. And what this is a group of experts from across the survey research industry.
So the American Association for Public Opinion Research, which is APOR, they convened a meeting which probably looked something like this. And in that meeting, they analyzed how the 2016 polls were wrong. They produced a report called An Evaluation of 2016 Election Polls in the United States. One thing that you hear a lot of pollsters say about 2016 is, well, national polls were generally correct and accurate by historical standards. You know, I personally get tired of this kind of excuse. They had Hillary Clinton with, an average of a 7-point lead, and then magically right before the election, she only had about a 3-point lead. But nonetheless, the important part of this report is the theories why polls underestimated support for Trump. So the first one is late deciding voters. The second one is reporting error, and that's the shy Trump hypothesis. That was number 2 from what I just showed earlier. The non-response bias, which was number 1 from what I showed earlier. Modeling error. I say methodology and modeling. I use those words interchangeably. But just so we're clear, technically speaking, methodology is the way or the method they use to gather all of the information, and modeling is taking that information and adjusting it to more likely represent the voting population. And then they had something called ballot order effect, which was kind of a load of bull. It basically said that because Donald Trump was the first name on a lot of ballots in key swing states, that people just generally choose the one that's on top. So you had, I guess, a bunch of voters going there and being like, well, President of the United States, I'll just tick that one because it's right there on the top. A little bit strange. I don't agree with that. But out of all this whole entire report, that's what's important, is these 5 things. So again, late deciding voters, reporting error, non-response bias, modeling error, weighted or likely models were faulty, and ballot order effect. We're going to skip the performance of the polls relative to 2016 because they just sort of pat themselves on the back for only being off by a couple points because the polls tightened at the very end and blah, 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 blah. This was the error that they had projected in the states. It was a 5.1% error. So they underestimated Trump support by 2.1 and overestimated Clinton support by 3.0, thus having a total effect of being wrong by 5.1%. So with respect to their first hypothesis or their first theory, the issue here is that the late decided voters supposedly swung towards Trump, so much so that it was a gain that was underestimated in the polls. So you see here that it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 2% in Florida, 1.4% in Michigan, 2.3% in Pennsylvania, 4.3% in Wisconsin. And so when you look at those numbers and you notice they had a 5% differential, that only explains about 40% of the difference, if that. So where's the other 60%? Oh, and by the way, I disagree with this. One of the reasons is because you had a lot of polls that tightened in the end. I think a lot of this was picked up in that tightening of the polls. A more interesting way to measure it would have been, what were the polls 2 weeks before election as opposed to what it was on election day? Because on election day, the polls tightened. And the reason they tightened is because as people were making their decisions, a lot of this was wrapped up into that. So they still had a 5-point spread. And I think it was after the polls tightened by about 3 percentage points. So I believe that this 2 to 3% that they're saying here happened at the very end was already captured in late polling. So they're basically double dipping on this late polling percentage. They're saying, well, we were only off by 5%, but we can account for 2% of it on this. Well, no, he was behind 7 or 8% 2 weeks before the end of the poll. So as voters decided towards the end, you caught that already in your polls. So you can't double dip and say, well, he was 7 points behind 2 weeks leading up to the election. He's now 5 points behind, but we can account for that because we didn't see all these voters at the very end choosing Trump. Yeah, you did. You caught that already. That's why he was only 5.1 points behind in the state polls. So when it comes to their second, the shy Trump hypothesis, they come to the conclusion that if the shy Trump effect was real, however, there is no reason to expect that it would have been confined to polls conducted very late in the campaign, basically saying that it would have shown itself throughout the whole entire process, therefore it's wrong. I disagree with this assessment. And here is where we need to talk about the Trafalgar Polling Group. The Trafalgar Polling Group is made fun of by other pollsters. It's considered a bad poll, but they were a little bit more accurate in the upper Midwest states. They didn't do too well in Florida. They were a little bit further off in Florida than the average poll. They were a little bit more off in Georgia and Arizona, but they were really good at the upper Midwest. And let's take a look at their polling methodologies and see what we can see from why they may have gotten it correct. So the report by APOR says, as discussed above, polls generally underestimated Trump support in Pennsylvania and Michigan, but there was one exception. Trafalgar Group, a Republican-affiliated IVR firm, was the only pollster to correctly project Trump victories in both states. In fact, in each of the 6 battleground states they polled, they overestimated support for Trump in states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina. Trafalgar's pro-Trump tilt yielded impressive results, but in Colorado and Florida, the overestimation of Trump support led to larger absolute error. So they were better in places like Michigan and Pennsylvania, so they're really good in the upper Midwest, but in Colorado and Florida, their projections failed. It goes on to say, albeit with numbers that projected the correct winner. So it's kind of like their statement of, well, we projected Hillary Clinton to win the popular vote, and she did, therefore polls aren't flawed. Same kind of concept, but whatever. It then goes on to say that Trafalgar did forecast Trump wins in both Michigan and Pennsylvania. They were not necessarily the most accurate pollster or even the most accurate IVR poll in 2016. So what did they do that was different? It says 2 distinctive design decisions seem to explain why Trafalgar's results were consistently more favorable to Trump. They took a novel approach for producing final vote preference estimates. According to their methods report, the final published ballot test is a combination of survey respondents to both a standard ballot test and a ballot test gauging where respondents' neighbors stand. This addresses the underlying bias of traditional polling, wherein respondents who are not wholly truthful about their position regarding highly controversial candidates, emphasis added, the general idea is that if people will not admit they personally would vote for Trump, they would admit that their neighbors would. As Stinson 2016 reported, the other distinctive feature of Trafalgar's polling was that they selected their samples from voters using a more inclusive than normal approach that included registered voters who had not voted for years. Some had not voted since 2006, according to Trafalgar's CEO Robert Cahaly, I believe is how it's pronounced. Other pollsters tend to not sample such records. Earlier in their video, there's a woman saying, "Are you really a likely voter? If you don't fit the description of a likely voter, they're likely to toss out your vote, even though you say you're going to vote, because they always get an over response on who's likely to vote." If someone had not voted since 2006, they would not pass a typical pollster's filter to filter out people who say they're going to vote but don't actually go and vote. So according to Trafalgar's CEO, other pollsters tend not to sample such records. And finally, it says, on its face, the practice of using a more inclusive voter file sample that brings in dormant voters, i.e. someone that hadn't voted since 2006, seems like something others may want to evaluate, other pollsters. The other idea of integrating reports about neighbors' vote choice with self-reported vote choice also warrants experimentation in a broad array of contests so as to better understand the properties of that measurement approach. So, just in case there is a shy voter, it would be easy to sort of wait. If you could come up with a decent model, you could probably do this, where you ask someone, who are you voting for? And then you ask someone, who is your neighbor voting for? And then you weight the two, and it could spit out a more accurate number. Because of social desirability bias, which is a real thing, it's not too hard to say, well, my neighbor, I'm pretty sure he's going to vote for the person who's socially undesirable. There's one other thing I want to touch on, which this methodology and modeling might capture that the other polls don't. If it is true that they're not getting enough Trump voters on the phone, which is essentially what my case is that they're not getting enough Trump voters on the phone, then in an area where you accidentally get a Democrat or someone who's voting for Biden or in this case Hillary Clinton on the phone, it would help nullify you accidentally getting an oversampling of Democrats if you ask them what their neighbor is doing, and they might honestly answer, I am voting for Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton, but my neighbor is voting for Trump. And the thing is if you oversample Democrats in an area which I'm going to prove later they're still doing in 2020. But if you oversample Democrats in one area, they're more likely to say their neighbor's voting Trump, because that might be the truth. They themselves might be voting for the Democrat, but their neighbor, both of their neighbors. In some of these areas where they're oversampling Democrats still to this day, these areas are going 3-1, or were going 3-1 for Donald Trump. So unless he lost 30% of his support in these rural areas, these fracking areas, these oil areas, then they are completely and utterly oversampling Democrats in these areas. And this methodology and this modeling would actually account for that. Because if you accidentally call the one Democrat who's in that area, he's going to say, well, my neighbors are voting for Donald Trump, because that's the truth. And so your oversampling of Democrats would help be nullified by just adding in that simple question. So here we start to get into the meat and potatoes, the non-response bias. And they go on to state, one alarming possibility raised by the direction of polling errors was that, broadly speaking, some segment of Trump's support base was not participating in polls. Participation in polls is quite low across the ideological spectrum and has been for some time. And even the most rigorous polls in 2016 had single-digit response rates. They go on to say, so it is not the case that most Clinton supporters were taking polls while most Trump supporters were not. Rather, the pattern would have been more subtle. Differential non-response, if it was a real problem, and see how they're saying if it was a real problem, they don't actually believe this is the problem, it is, would have manifested as Trump supporters being somewhat less willing to participate in surveys on average than Clinton supporters. So they then go on to basically make a defense because of the national polls weren't that wrong. This is not the case that there was a non-response bias, which also means by a roundabout way that there was no shy Trump voter, that people across the ideological spectrum was responding in a rate sufficient to make proper data modeling data sets. That is not the case. That is absolutely not the case, and I will prove it here in a second. So they're making the claim that non-response bias was not responsible for the differences in why their polling was wrong, because they say that they had enough people across the ideological spectrum in order to make proper data modeling sets. I can assure you that is not the case. That is not only wrong, but I will prove it here in a second. So the question is, why is APOR putting out this study that contradicts what I'm about to show you? And the reason is because APOR is a group that represents pollsters. You're not going to get a group of pollsters, a group that represents pollsters, to say that data modeling cannot be correct because they don't have enough participation in order to make the proper data modeling data sets. So put another way, across the ideological spectrum, they are not getting enough people to respond. Because they're not getting enough people to respond, doesn't matter what their methodology is, it doesn't matter what their model is, because they were going to always underrepresent the Trump vote. Now let's take a look at why they think non-response bias was not the issue. They're wrong, but let's look at why. So what is their proof? Basically, they're saying that if a non-response bias was present, then you would assume that staunchly pro-Trump areas would not be properly weighted into these polls. They then go on to show you that they weighted correctly the number of people from rural areas into their polls, and the data sets matched that weighting correctly. That begs the question, if that was correct, then why, if you go back and you rerun the models of 2016, you still can't produce a Donald Trump victory, nor can you produce a Donald Trump lead in these swing states? And it's because of the non-response bias. Now, whether you measure that, whatever way you measure that, it still persisted one way or another. You couldn't get Donald Trump voters on the phone, because if you're calling the wrong people and your survey of these areas that were pro-Trump underrepresented Trump's numbers, it doesn't matter how much you adjust for that area. So you call 5 people from a rural area, 2 of them say they're voting Clinton, 3 say they're voting Trump, but that area goes 80-20, so it should have been 4 people going Trump, 2 people going. It doesn't matter if you weight that correctly and say, well, we had 15% of the electorate that was rural, so we'll just take that 5 votes and spread it across the rural area. Because bad data in equals bad data out. Or as another way to put it, garbage in equals garbage out. There was no way for them to account for the Trump voter, and therefore could never have created a proper model or a proper data set. Couldn't have done it. Not possible. So let's skip all the way down to the conclusions and then look at the 2016 polls after applying these and see how they don't actually solve the issue. Reasons for underestimating Trump support. They put most of that on late changes in voter choices. So they're basically saying that the people who decided in the last week caught them by surprise, which is strange because a lot of their polling reflected the tightening of the race. So I don't think that's correct, but whatever, it's their assessment. The second thing they say that's important is that they failed to weight by education. Education was strongly correlated with presidential vote in key states. That is, voters with higher education levels were more likely to vote for Clinton, yet some pollsters, especially state-level pollsters, did not adjust for education in their weighting, even though college graduates were overrepresented in their surveys. This led to an underestimation of support for Trump. Bull. That is not what happened. That is absolutely not what happened. And the reason we know that that didn't happen is because if you rerun the numbers from 2016, adjusting for education, you still end up with a 4 to 6% difference in the swing states. So the one solution that they put out that pollsters could do before swing voters make their decision was to adjust for education. Even if you adjusted the 2016 polls for education, you still got a 4 to 6% differential. Why? Because they could not get the Trump voter on the phone. Even though they deny that, that is the reason. You could not get enough Trump voters on the phone, whether it's because they were shy or they just didn't know conservative phone numbers, or the bot that they chose to dial random numbers was biased and chose numbers that looked like they belonged to liberals. I don't know. I don't know why, but that's the reason. So we can look at the New York Times. And this article was written on May 31st, 2017 by Nate Cohn. So this article references the report that I'm looking at now. And what happens is you can go all the way down here to the bottom and you find a plausible theory among all of this mess. So this theory sounds much more plausible, and here it is. But there's a more pessimistic possibility, one that has been mainly promulgated by analysts at Civics Analytics. Their theory, advanced in post-election interviews and presentations at APOR, is that Trump voters weren't responding to telephone surveys because they had lower levels of civic engagement. So this notion that polls would miss disengaged voters is not new. It's probably the best known response bias in polling. Respondents are likelier than people who don't respond to surveys to be voters, to be trusting of others, and to be volunteers or engaged in other communities. If these voters were also inclined toward Mr. Trump, the ones that don't participate and do the civic engagement, it would explain the bias towards Mrs. Clinton and in pre-election polls. For the record, they say that Trump voters and Clinton voters had the same amount of civic engagement. So it begs the question once again that the only outlier is they could not get Trump voters on the phone. That's bottom line what it came down to. Whether it was shy, whether it was whatever, no matter which way you measure it, it doesn't matter. They couldn't get Trump voters on the phone in sufficient numbers. They go on to say this would pose a more serious challenge to survey research. It would suggest that declining response rates have finally taken a toll on the accuracy of political polling, which is true. And that would be hard to fix. Here's the issue. If they can't get this type of voter on the phone, which they can't, then it's not like they're searching for a needle in a haystack. It's much worse than that. If you remember nothing else from this whole entire video, remember this, that they're not searching for a needle in a haystack. It's more like they're searching for life on another planet. They don't know how to measure it. They don't know what they're trying to measure. And even if they did know what they're trying to measure and how to measure it, they don't know what direction to look in. Which indicates that polling and modern day polling methods are broken, and there's no good way to fix them. The response rate is too low to get a good distribution of what is going on in state level polling. The only way to fix that is to maybe adjust your polling methods the way that Trafalgar has. Not that they've perfected the method, not that it's the perfect method, but there's something to adding another question that maybe you get a higher response rate from one person, because then you get to know what their neighbors think. And if they're afraid to tell you what they think, then they're also more likely to respond that their neighbors are doing something that they themselves are doing. So maybe there's something to this. Okay, so what we have established is that they couldn't get the Trump voter on the phone, even given their polling responses, if they knew the actual voter turnout and they adjusted for education, which were the two things that APOR wanted pollsters to adjust for, they still would not have managed to get a proper poll that showed Trump winning, or even in some cases within the margin of error. He still would have been 6 points behind. He still would have been 4 to 6 points behind in many of these states. There's something about their polling method in which they're not getting the Trump voter on the phone. The question is, are they still doing that in 2020? So let's take a look at Trump defectors help Biden build leads in Wisconsin. I don't care about this article. I'm not going to go into it. It's not that I don't care about this article. For my purposes, it doesn't matter. The one thing I'm looking at in this article is it shows something unique. It shows a scatter plot of where they're getting their numbers for this poll. And that's important because now we can see, are they underpolling Trump voters again? So on the left is the scatter plot of the New York Times poll, which basically showed that they took a bunch of voters that say that they voted +3 for Trump in 2016, and now they're +6 for Biden, which is a 9-point swing. So they're making the case that their poll is diverse, that it's spread out, and they can make the claim that Joe Biden is ahead by an average of 6 points in these swing states. Let's take a deeper look. Let's start with, Pennsylvania. Why not? I guess anywhere will do. Look down here, bottom corner. Heavily red territory for Donald Trump. Greene County, Pennsylvania. 68% voted for Donald Trump in 2016. What does this poll show? Joe Biden is leading Donald Trump in Greene County, Pennsylvania by 66% to 33% because there's only 3 dots in there. Well, what about the county next to him? Let's go to Fayette County. Was again a 2 to 1 margin for Donald Trump. What do they have here? Let's see. Let's assume it goes up to here. We'll put this red one in. So we'll say 1 red one, 2 red ones, 3 red ones, 4 red 5, 6. 6 red ones and 1 blue one, 2 blue ones, 3 blue ones, 4 blue ones, 5 blue ones because there's 2 back there. So 5 to 6. So that's almost a 50% split. Let's do the math of that one. 5 divided by 11 because it was 5 to 6. According to this poll, and assuming I'm counting all the dots, because there might actually be more blue ones in here. But according to this poll, Joe Biden's going to get 45% in Fayette County, Pennsylvania. He's going to get 66%. He's going to flip the numbers from where Donald Trump was in Greene County, Pennsylvania. So already I'm seeing a problem with these polls. They're underpolling Donald Trump's voters. So I don't care how much you adjust these numbers. Bad information in is bad information out. It's just the first couple counties. Where else can we look? Where else can we look where we can count the dots? Susquehanna County, let's go up here. Susquehanna County, another over 2-to-1 margin. What do they have in Susquehanna County? Let's see, it comes about to over here. Even if we include these 2 red dots, so 1, 2, 3, 3 red dots to 2 blue dots. What is that? 60-40? Does that look like a county that's going to go 60-40? Are they undercounting Donald Trump votes again? What about the next county over? What is that? Bradford County? Bradford County. Probably includes that blue one. Let's go ahead and include the red one too. So 1 red one, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6, 2, 1, 2, 3. So that seems kind of close. Except that I now realize I counted those 2 red dots on the east side twice. Once for Susquehanna County and once for this one. What did Bradford County go? Oh, look, wow. Almost a 3-to-1 margin. But according to this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to 1, 2, 3. So you got 33% to 66%. Are they undercounting Donald Trump's vote? Again, where else can we count some votes? What is this, Lycoming? Yeah. So this is the fracking region of Pennsylvania. It basically runs from Susquehanna down through the upper center, all the way down here to Pittsburgh, and down to the bottom corner of the state down here. So this is the fracking territory all along here. Do you think these voters are going Joe Biden? I doubt it. And as we can see, we're just looking at a couple counties. They've already undercounted. So let's go to Lycoming County. Well, let's see what they got here. I'm seeing at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 red ones. At least. Let's go ahead and count this one. 6. What have we got in blue? 1, 2. There's one back here that I can barely see. That's 3, 4, 5. Let's make that part of Lycoming County. So we're including this as Lycoming County. So you got 5 to 6. Once again, 5 to 6, 45%. 46% if you want to round up. 46% is going to go to Joe Biden according to this analysis. Are they undercounting Trump votes? It was 70-25 back in 2016. That's Pennsylvania. Let's move on. Let's move on. Let's see what else we got. Let's go to Michigan. I don't know. How do we divide this up? Here's a decent divide. We'll go right there. So half through Bay County. We'll go across right there so we can get a nice cut right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. Let's count it again just to make sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. So 25 twice, I'm going with 25. Let's count the blue dots. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Okay, 21. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. So we've got 21 to 25. What does that equal? Well, 21 divided by 21 plus 25 is 46. Divided by 46. They're telling me that in the finger part of the glove of Michigan, which, by the way, if you're not from Michigan, that's all you are to the rest of the United States. You're just a glove. The part for the 4 fingers, according to this survey, so it's 46% for Trump. How did it vote in 2016? 41%. That's not bad. 37%, 45%. That's pretty good for a Democrat. 27, 36, 36. 32, 32, 29, 30, 21, 20, 40, 46. So I'm looking at all of this, and I'm trying to figure out Where do they get the 45%? There's 36% there. And that, I believe, is below our line. Yeah, that would be this cluster here, I think. That's below our line. So it's not even a part. Show me where on this map that 45% is going to go to Biden on this map. Is it possible? Is it possible that Donald Trump lost about, 15% support in this area? It's possible. How probable is it, though? What's more likely, that they're not calling Trump voters again? They can't get them on the phone again? Is that more likely? Seems pretty strange. 46% is what this, according to what this poll is saying, is what's going to go for Donald Trump in this area. Yeah, sure. What about this part of Michigan? By the way, while we're on the subject of this, did Wisconsin lose this part of Michigan, like in a bet to Michigan? Like what's the deal with this part? I don't understand why it's part of Michigan and not Wisconsin. But anyway, let's take a look at this data. It's pretty easy to count. Let's go ahead and count that red one in and that blue one in, out. I don't care. Let's count them both in. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I see a little red one down there. 10, 11, 12. So we've got 12 red dots. How many blue dots? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 to 12. So 10 divided by 22 is, again, 45%, 46% if you want to round it up. Let's just stick it at 45%. Are you telling me that Joe Biden's going to win 45% of the vote in this part of Michigan, the part that they won from Wisconsin in a bet, I assume? Don't quote me on that. Okay. Where do you see 45%? Are they underpolling Donald Trump's voters again? And if so, is it a 5% margin? Is it a 3% margin? Hey, look, here's one. What is that, Marquette County? Isn't there a college up there? Hey, look, something that might be 45%. But you have, and that's a pretty big county. Let's see. There's a pretty big county, and it didn't go. That is a big county. That is a big county, so it could help throw the numbers. But 46% overall in this region? Highly doubtful. Especially when this county is half this county, and it's 2-1 Donald Trump, or it was in 2016. That would pretty much nullify that to even being anywhere close to 46%, just these two counties. Then you add in all these other counties. This is a pretty decent-sized county, and it went 60-40, 60-35 to Donald Trump. So where are they getting this 45%? Where are they getting this 45% up in this area? Are they underpolling Donald Trump's people again? And I keep saying that because I'm trying to drive this point home. Can we count anything in Michigan or Wisconsin? I mean, it's pretty full. What about the Iron Range? So the Iron Range has, I believe, now 9 mayors in this area. This is the Iron Range. It's 7 counties. I believe it goes all the way to, I can't remember. Atkin County, is that part of it? Coochie-Ching. Got to be the best name for a county. Coochie-Ching has to be the best name for a county ever. Anyway, I believe it's these 7 counties. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Maybe it doesn't include this one. Anyway, it's this area right here. There is an environmental fight going on up there. There's a mine that wants to open. Environmentalists with the Obama administration stopped the mine from opening. Donald Trump lifted environmental regulations to allow a 7th mine. I believe there's 6 currently operating, but nonetheless, it's one more mine. And the environmentalists took the Trump administration and the area to court to tie it up in court. So there's a mine that could have been opened. Donald Trump's fighting for it, and the environmentalists are fighting against it. Regardless of where you stand on the issue, this matters to this area because it means jobs. This is the Iron Range. It means jobs. So let's see how this turns out. 15 to 22. Did I get that right? Let's count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. 14 to 22. So they're saying this area is going to go at a margin of 14 to 22 for Joe Biden. So 22 divided by, it would be 36. 14 to 22 is 36, divided by 36. They're saying that Joe Biden is going to get 61% of the vote in this area right here. 61%. It's a huge swing. Let's take a look. Okay, Hillary Clinton got 51, 47, 56, 46. $38, 36. So they're saying in the iron range, where for the first time in history, it was 6 mayors and now 3 more signed on. So 9 mayors have actually backed a Republican candidate. First time in history they backed anybody, let alone a Republican candidate. And it is purely because of that iron mine. You're telling me in this area where unions are polling their own members and their own members are saying they're going 50-50 for Donald Trump over and Joe Biden. So they're splitting the vote. You're telling me that somehow they're going to pull out 61%, that Joe Biden's going to do better in Lake County, in St. Louis County, Minnesota, Cook County. He's going to do better by a margin of about 10% on average. Probably even more. Well, they're such small counties. So by a margin of about 10%. Joe Biden's going to do better by 10% in this area? Yeah, I don't think so. I think you're undercounting Trump votes again. So, I mean, I don't know. Where else can we do this? In this region, we got 1, 2, this whole area. I mean, hell, look at this. This whole area here. Let's just assume it's all this up here. So this whole area, you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You got 10 blue ones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 red ones, all in this upper part. So they're going to have us believe that Joe Biden is going to do 62.5%, 63%. He's going to do 63% in the northwestern part of Minnesota. 63% is what Joe Biden is going to do. Are they underpolling Donald Trump supporters again? I don't see how he could get 62% up here. I just don't see it. So how is it? So once again, thank you for the scatter plot, New York Times. But I think the scatter plot proves one thing. The polling was broken in 2016 because they couldn't get enough Donald Trump voters on the phone. The polling is broken again in 2020. So let's answer the question. Is polling in 2020 accurate? No. Not a chance. Not a chance, not a snowball's chance in hell that it's even remotely accurate. They are underpolling Donald Trump voters again, and I think they know they're doing it. What's the difference? I don't know. Is it 5%? Is it 3%? Is it 7%? So I think that's going to be my next video. I'm going to go through the states, the swing states, and give Donald Trump a 3% bump. I'm going to give him a 5% bump. I'm going to give him a 7% bump and see what that does to the electorate. Because my guess is it's somewhere between 5 and 7%, just a pure guess, of how far off the polls are. Because if the polls say he's ahead by 6, he's probably at worst Joe Biden's ahead by 3 for the Donald Trump campaign. So no, I don't think the polls are correct. The 2020 polls are just as flawed as the 2016 polls. They can't account for the Trump voter. They can't get him on the phone. And it doesn't matter how much they adjust these numbers. It's not going to create a proper model. Please share this video across all platforms if you can. Like and subscribe. If you made it this far, you're a hero. You are absolutely a hero in my book. Thank you, and I'll see you next video.